And now on to the topic of practical spirituality in Islam. I've got my phone here, my watch here, so I don't overdo it as far as time is concerned. I'll be watching closely the time. I'm from the East. In the East, we talk and talk and talk and talk. And we only stop when somebody starts to snore. But I'll be compassionate. I'll look at the time. And on the right side, I've got some notes. So let me start by saying, I love studying Mahatma Gandhi, who was very aware of what it takes to create peace in a multi-religious society. He made several points. He said, it is the sacred duty of every individual to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religion. Mark the words. It's not just a nice thing. It is the sacred duty of every individual to have an appreciative understanding of the other person's religion. That was point number one. Point number two, he would say, let's acknowledge every single religion has truths and untruths. If some people got excited, he would say, I'm not saying that your revelations are not divine. They might be divine. But the human mind is less than divine. When it tries to understand a divine verse, the understanding can be less than divine. I should add, when I work with my Interfaith Amigos, ever since 9/11, I've been working with a rabbi and a pastor. We're called the Interfaith Amigos. We travel all over the country, even overseas, sharing a message of inclusivity. And we make one important point, that every single holy book has two kinds of verses: particular verses and universal verses. Particular verses are in desperate need of historical and textual context. Universal verses are timeless, placeless, and filled with wisdom. The problem is, if I take a particular verse from my tradition and advocate that as a universal verse, or if you take from your tradition a universal verse and compare that to a particular verse from the Qur'an, that's not equivalent. And that's what's happening to a lot of Muslims, to what is being criticized in Islam. They take a universal verse from any tradition and they compare that to a particular verse. No, a universal has to be compared with a universal verse. Okay, point number three, Gandhi would make. He would say, if an extremist, doesn't matter what religion, commits something wrong, commits violence, Gandhi would say, I beg you, I implore you, do not criticize this person's religion. Please do not criticize this person's religion. Rather, point out to this person verses of beauty and wisdom from this person's own tradition. This is how you create peace. Okay, just be with that for a few moments. And now let me briefly touch upon some points about Islam that have fascinated many people. You might not know, but there is an abundance of spirituality in Islam. You might have heard of Rumi, the 13th century sage Rumi. So Rumi would utter, I'm a slave of the Qur'an. I am dust on the path of Muhammad. You might have heard of Hafiz, 14th century Hafiz. His name is not Hafiz actually. His name is Muhammad Shamsuddin. Why is he called Hafiz? That's a title. It's a title given to someone who has memorized the Quran from beginning to end. So because Muhammad Shamsuddin had memorized the Quran in its entirety, he was called Hafiz. You might have heard or not of the 8th, 9th century most beloved female sage in Islam, Rabia. I would suggest you You Google Uncle Google to find out Rabia, Rabia, a beautiful female saint who would spend night after night meditating on verses of the Quran. So if you study religions, for example, if I as a Muslim study Buddhism, and I love studying different religions, Buddhism has 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Path. Islam has 3 principles and 5 pillars. So let me go over them and extract some insight that could be of practical value. The first principle of Islam is Islam itself. And what does Islam mean? Literally, it means to surrender in peace. The question is, what am I surrendering? And the Quran says, what you're surrendering is your attachment to your ego. You're surrendering your attachment to your ego so that, as the Quran says, you can bring a heart turned in devotion to God. This so inspired Rumi, the 13th century sage Rumi, who, by the way, did almost no writing. He would just go into a trance and just utter, and his family and friends would write them down. And the collection of that is Rumi poetry. So Rumi uttered, "Where will you find a customer like God who pays in gold? Who accepts your counterfeit coins? Who buys your dirty, shabby bag of goods? Who takes a few teardrops and in return gives a spiritual spring so delicious that even sugar is jealous of its sweetness?" And Rumi goes on, for God's sake, sell and buy at once. Where will you find a market like this? For one little seed, the entire rose garden. For one little breath, the divine breath. For God's sake, sell and buy at once. This is called the divine exchange. This is the main work in Islam, Islamic spirituality, to bring divinity in the center of your life and not your ego. It's constant daily work. Prophet Muhammad said, every day you set out in the course of the day, you're either ennobling, enriching your soul, or you're diminishing it by the choices you make. That's one important practical piece of wisdom. Another one is, there's an Eastern saying, whose ever approval you seek, you become their prisoner. Ponder on this. It's not a question of good or bad. It's a law of the created world. Whose ever approval you are seeking, you become their prisoner. Are you aware of that? If you're aware of that, the Islamic mystics say, here's the answer. The antidote, if you're on the wrong track. Choose your jailers with care and deliberation. Choose your jailers with care and deliberation. Okay, let's move on. I got a lot of ground to cover. The second principle is Iman, having faith. The Quran makes it clear there are different stages of faith. The first stage is, I might have faith in something higher than human personality, call it God. But it cannot be based, the Quran says, only on hearsay. You've got to go deeper. The second stage is called witnessing. You explore, you learn by witnessing. The third stage is you experience, you taste the meaning of faith through the trials and tribulations of life. An example or a metaphor is about faith is like the flame of a candle, and there is a moth And the moth first hears of the flame of the candle. That's the first stage of faith. Second stage is the moth sees the flame. Witnesses it. That's the second stage. But then the moth comes close to the flame and feels the warmth, the glow of presence. That's when the faith emerges from within. So in Islam, here's the practical insight. In building faith, move from borrowed certainty to an inner knowing. That's real faith. I repeat, to build faith, to cultivate faith, to really experience faith, I have to move from, quote unquote, borrowed certainty to inner knowing. Just be with that for a few moments. Is that how I build my faith? Okay, third principle, very important, which Muslims overlook, non-Muslims overlook because of human nature. It's okay, but the Quran says a large part of your work on planet Earth is to become a more complete, developed human being. And the other half is to be of service. But this third point is about evolving in the fullness of my being. It's about transforming my ego from a commanding master into a personal assistant. How? One way is through compassionate self-witnessing. Through compassionate self-witnessing, observing myself continuously. Shining the light on my shadow, diminishing it. Shining the light on my divine attributes, like the sun on a plant, flourishing it. The Quran says that's just one part of it, transforming the ego. You got to also purify your heart, says the Quran. Polish the heart. A verse in the Quran says, when you have an evil thought, do something evil, it creates a rust on the heart that separates you from divinity because of that rust. And the Prophet Muhammad said, for every rust, there is a polish. And the polish, or the rust of the heart, is remembrance of God. Meaning, use God solvents to polish the heart. Make it a polished mirror so that it reflects the face of Allah. Not easy. Rumi says in his poetry, in his utterance, Jamal, if you get irritated by every rub, how will the mirror of your heart ever be polished? The Quran goes on, not just polish the heart, you got to open the heart. By the way, the heart appears in the Quran 132 times. Open the heart, open the heart. How? One way is by embracing not only my 10,000 joys of life, but also my 10,000 sorrows of life, which are inevitable. It's a world of duality. Don't run towards pain and suffering, just don't run away from it. Carl Jung, who studied many Eastern traditions, he would say, would you once in your life have the courage and the grace to kiss the demons and dragons within you? That is how they turn into a prince or princess. So there are many techniques in Islamic spirituality of embracing my difficult feelings, not running away from it, not avoiding it, allowing my heart to break little by little. It creates an inner spaciousness. There's a wonderful poetry by Rumi about this technique of embracing, enfolding with compassion for myself, my pain, my anger, my fear, my hate. The Quran says all feelings are sacred. If I'm having a difficult feeling, it's because that feeling is begging me to kiss it, to enfold it. Rumi utters, take a pickaxe and break open your stony heart. Take a pickaxe and break open your stony heart. The heart's matrix is glutted with rubies. Springs of laughter are buried in your chest. Okay, those were the 3 principles. Let me move on to the 5 pillars, and I'm looking at the time here. Okay, either I speak faster or shorten my content. So the first pillar is, there is no God but God. There's a lot of depth to that. The Quran has many verses about that. One verse in the Quran says, if all the trees in the universe became pens, and all the 7 oceans became ink, and you began to write out the mystery of God, you wouldn't come close to describing even a fraction of the fraction of the fraction of God's mysteries. This is in every tradition. You know, I love studying Taoism, that famous verse from Taoism about God. They call it the Tao. Those who say do not know, and those who know do not say. And Rumi, when he studied this verse from the Quran about the mystery of God, he goes into a trance and he comes out with his famous utterance about the invisible world. He said, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. Sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. Cleverness might be opinion, judgment. Bewilderment might be naked vision. Okay, let me take one more verse from the Quran. There are many verses in the Quran about God. Another one I like very much, in the Quran it says, God is closer to you than your jugular vein. God is closer to you than your jugular vein. Another verse in the Quran says, every so where you turn is the face of Allah. Every so where you turn is the face of Allah. This reminds me of a wonderful true story of Rabia, that beloved female saint from Iraq, actually, 8th, 9th century. She was walking the streets of Basra, and she overheard this great spiritual teacher preaching outdoors to students. And the teacher was saying, Allah, God, divinity is so merciful. If you just knock on God's door and keep on knocking on God's door, keep on knocking on God's door, keep on knocking on God's door, and out of compassion, one day Allah will open the door. And Rabia, who overheard that, said, brother, when was a door ever closed? And the teacher stands up and bows to her. That's the end of the story. Okay. The first pillar is the most important one, or very important one. It has 2 parts. One is, there is no God but God. The second part is, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. A very misunderstood verse by Muslims and non-Muslims, because they both assume that the Quran is saying that Muhammad is the greatest of all messengers. Absolutely un-Quranic, false. The Quran has several verses. It says, O Muhammad, there are many apostles who came before you, and there's nothing revealed to you that is new, that has not been revealed to other apostles. Therefore, says the Quran, make no distinction between the apostles, between the messengers, the prophets. And by the way, all the prophets are honored in the Quran. Abraham in the Quran is called the friend of God. Moses or Musa is called the one who talked to God. Jesus is called the Spirit of God. And there are 25 prophets mentioned. And Mary, mother of Jesus, has an entire chapter in the Quran named Maryam. And she's called the holiest of the holy among women. And there is far, far, far more about Mary in the Quran than all the Christian scriptures put together. Okay, let me move on. The second pillar is prayer. I don't know if you've seen any Muslim pray. They go like this, they go like this, they bow, they stand up, they prostrate. And when they finish and they sit on the knees, they go send greetings to the right side, greetings to the left side. Who are they sending greetings to? To the angels who rush into places of sacredness. And where did Muhammad get this idea of using the body and going like this? And all they're saying is praising God and thanking God. Muhammad had a vision when he ascended levels of heaven, and he beheld the sight of angels all going like this, bowing, prostrating. And from that, he got the idea that a prayer should consist an imitation of angels, because all the angels were saying, he intuited, they were praising God and thanking God, should consist of praising God and thanking God and using the gift of a body to express adoration. And like other traditions, Muslims really encourage the repetition of a mantra. Like any mantra, Om Mane Padme Hum in Buddhism, Soham Hamsa in Hinduism, Jesus, I love you. Why would a mantra work? Why would a repetition continuously, repeating it again and again, why would it have value? A metaphor in many traditions. Here's a metaphor, a vat of dye, D-Y-E, color, a pot of color. You take a cloth, you dip it inside that vat of color, you take it out, it has a beautiful color, but it fades away over time. But what happens if you dip the cloth in the pot, the vat of dye, again and 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 again? There comes a time it becomes color fast, permanent. So by repeating a mantra again and again, it perfumes my heart, it colors me. Okay. The third pillar is service. Rumi says, can you be a lamp, a lifeboat, or a ladder to others? And the Quran says, if you're being charitable, if you're giving, there are some gateways. What is real service, real giving? The Quran says the first gateway is give freely of what you love. That's real giving. Number two, give to those who ask and those who cannot ask. Number three, if possible, give quietly. Number four, very important, this is in all the traditions, be of service without attachment to the fruits of the service, to the praise you get, to the monetary reward you might get. You do it for the sake of Allah, the God of all of humanity. And there is such joy in being of service. You see, I'm a Bengali. There's a Bengali poet named Tagore who had this wonderful poetry. I slept and dreamt life was joy. I awoke and found life was service. I served and lo, service was joy. Okay, very quickly, last two ones. Fourth one is Ramadan. Coming up in March, Muslims fast from pre-sunrise to sunset. No water, no food. Why? To express gratitude by doing a spiritual exercise to build what is called self-restraint, to also fast from anger, from hate. But why do they do that? They do it because it was in that month that the first verses of the Quran descended upon Prophet Muhammad when he was meditating in a cave. So to express gratitude for the gift of the Qur'an, Muslims will undergo a month of spiritual practice of fasting physically to heal and purify the body, but also to purify the mind and the emotions, to cleanse oneself. The Quran says to build self-restraint. I'm so tempted. I've got to give you this one story. This is in Islam, we have a mythical character named the Mullah. I wrote a book about it, Laughter of the Sufis, through whom much of wisdom is conveyed. So this fictional Mullah has lost his donkey. That's a big deal in that part of the world. It's your friend, source of livelihood. The entire village tries to find the donkey. They cannot find the donkey. They come in the evening to give Mullah the bad news that the donkey is lost forever. And the Mullah is in the town square on his knees saying, Allah, thank you, thank you. I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful. They say, Mullah, you haven't heard the bad news. Your donkey is lost forever. He says, I know, but I'm so grateful because imagine what could have happened to me if I was on the donkey. So one meaning is always be grateful. And if I'm giving thanks in times of difficulties, I'm giving thanks for unknown blessings already on their way. Okay, last point, and I'll just finish with that. The need for community. A wall standing alone is useless. Add to it other walls, it can support a roof, even a granary. Only when ink joins with a pen can the blank paper say something. We all desperately need community. Rumi says, please come out of the circle of time and enter the circle of love. And Prophet Muhammad said, particularly you need a spiritual community with whom you can be vulnerable with the members because you trust them, you love them, and they love the truth. His famous words are, Jamal, your spiritual practices are only as good as those of your closest friends. Therefore, choose your friends wisely. Okay, I've reached the end of my time, so I'll just end by saying a famous saying of the Prophet Muhammad who said, Jamal, when you came here from the invisible world, everybody around you was laughing and smiling, but you were crying and weeping. Live such a life that when you depart, everybody is crying and weeping, but you are laughing and smiling. I wish this, my dear friends, for you and for me. Thank you. Thank you. So let's start with a meditation. If you kindly sit comfortably wherever you are, and then close your eyes. Focus on the nostril. And then, please, be with the breath. Just this much. Mindful of the in-breath and the out-breath. And now, letting go of this, and this time, focusing on the physical heart. Our heart has been yearning, aching, thirsting to connect with us. So if it works for you, put one hand over the heart and feel the heart, and put the other hand over that hand, and simply be with the heart and connect with the beat, the rhythm of the heart. And now, through the heart, listening to this beautiful revelation, that came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in a dream, where God, Spirit, Divinity tells humanity, "Oh beloved one," God is saying, "I cannot be contained in the space of the earth. I cannot be contained in the space of the heavens, but I can be contained in the space of the pure, loving heart." Just be with that mystery. That divine heart is inside human heart. Spirit, God is outside of us, and inside of us, inside the innermost chambers of our heart. The space of the heart is actually infinite, boundless. The Quran says, to divinity, to God, belong the most beautiful names. So Islamic mystics say, here's a wonderful practice. Focus on the boundless space of the heart and say some beautiful words. And they suggest words like, I love you, with feeling, unabashedly, no matter how awkward it feels, I love you. Or, please help me to love you. You can continue. Thank you, I am so grateful. You can go on. Please help me. Please help me. I need help. I surrender to you. And whatever else you like, whatever resonates. But repeat that again and again and again and again as you focus on the heart. You can never overdo this. I love you. Please help me to love you. Thank you. I am so grateful. Please help me. I need help. And as we say those words with feeling, a beautiful divine vibration filled with divine blessings, healing, love, empowerment, transformation is going from the tongue into the mouth, into the throat, deep into the chest, into the heart, and then into the hidden, and then into the hidden of the hidden, astonishingly, amazingly loving us, blessing us, healing us, empowering us. And now, stop saying anything at all. Just be very still for a few seconds. And I'll do a chant. This is an invocation that opens virtually all of the 114 chapters of the Quran. In the name of God, boundlessly compassionate, infinitely merciful. And then I add, there is no God but God, because that's the core of Islam. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. One more time. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. And gently opening your eyes.